Mae Robertson believed the doctor's cruel words that her twisted body made her worthless as a wife and mother, until a gentle miner named Caleb saw past her physical scars to the strength within. When her abusive stepfather arrived to drag her back to a loveless arranged marriage, she discovered that sometimes the most broken hearts can create the most beautiful miracles. But could a woman's society deemed damaged goods truly find the courage to fight for the love that might heal her forever? Blood dripped onto the white cloth as Mae Robertson's needle slipped again. The sharp pain in her finger felt like nothing compared to the ache that lived deep in her chest. She sat in the corner of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, trying to make herself as small as possible while the other women chatted about their beau and wedding plan. Montana territory stretched wild and endless beyond the frost-covered windows of Silver Creek mining camp. The year was 1867, and winter was coming early to the mountains. Mae could smell snow in the air, mixed with the scent of pine trees and wood smoke from a dozen chimneys. Mae, dear, you've been awfully quiet today. Mrs. Patterson's kind voice cut through her thoughts. The older woman ran the boarding house with a firm but gentle hand, treating the young women who lived there like daughters she'd never had. Just thinking, ma'am. Mae kept her eyes on her sewing, hoping no one would notice the tears she was fighting back. Her left arm hung at her side like a broken wing, twisted and weak from the fever that had nearly killed her when she was 7. The other women were kind enough not to stare, but she felt their pity like a weight on her shoulders. 3 months had passed since Dr. Hartwell spoke those terrible words that still echoed in her mind. She'd gone to see him about the cough that wouldn't go away, hoping for some simple medicine. Instead, he'd examined her twisted spine and weak lungs, then delivered his judgment like a death sentence. Best you forget about marriage and children, Miss Robertson. No man wants a wife who can't bear healthy babies. You're damaged goods, I'm afraid. The memory made her hands shake. She set down her needle and pressed her fingers against her eyes, trying to stop the tears that threatened to spill over. Outside, she could hear the miners coming back from their claims, their voices tired and discouraged. Most of the easy gold was gone from these mountains now, leaving behind only men who had nowhere else to go. Mae understood that feeling all too well. Child, you're bleeding on the fabric. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her chair, concern written across her weathered face. Let me see that finger. It's nothing. Mae tried to hide her hand, but Mrs. Patterson was having none of it. Nonsense. Nothing that bleeds is nothing. The older woman examined the small cut with gentle fingers. This needs cleaning. Come along to the kitchen. The kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of fresh bread. Mrs. Patterson sat Mae down at the wooden table and fetched a clean cloth and bowl of water. As she cleaned the wound, she studied Mae's face with knowing eyes. What's troubling you, dear? And don't tell me it's nothing. I've been watching you mope around here for months. Mae stared at her bandaged finger. How could she explain the emptiness that had settled in her bones? How could she tell this kind woman that she felt like a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives? Dr. Hartwell says I'll never marry, never have children. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. He says no man would want someone like me. Mrs. Patterson's face darkened like a storm cloud. Dr. Hartwell is a fool who thinks he knows everything because he has a fancy degree. What does he know about matters of the heart? But he's right, isn't he? Mae's voice was barely a whisper. Look at me. My arm doesn't work right. My back is crooked. I can barely climb stairs without getting winded. She touched her chest, feeling the flutter of her weak lungs. What man would want someone so broken? Oh, child. Mrs. Patterson pulled up a chair beside her. You listen to me. I've seen plenty of men in my 60 years, and the ones worth having don't care about such things. They care about what's in here. She tapped Mae's chest, right over her heart. And you have one of the biggest hearts I've ever known. Mae wanted to believe her, but doubt had taken root like a weed in her soul. Every day she watched the other young women receive letters from sweethearts, plan their futures, dream of homes and babies. She felt like she was watching life through a window, forever on the outside looking in. The kitchen door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of heavy boots on the porch. Anna Mae quickly wiped her eyes, not wanting anyone to see her crying. "Excuse me, ma'am," a deep voice spoke from the doorway. "I'm looking for Mrs. Patterson." Anna Mae looked up to see a tall man with dark hair and kind brown eyes. Snow dusted his shoulders like stars, and his hands were red with cold. She'd seen him around town before, one of the quieter miners who kept to himself and never caused trouble at the saloon. "That's me." Mrs. Patterson stood and smoothed her apron. "What can I do for you, Mr. Mitchell?" Caleb Mitchell. He pulled off his hat, revealing hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I was wondering if you might have a room available. The cabin I've been staying in has a leaky roof, and with winter coming, I'm afraid I'm all full up." Mrs. Patterson looked genuinely sorry. "But let me think. There might be something." As the two adults talked, Anna Mae found herself studying the stranger's face. There was something gentle about him, something that made her feel less invisible than usual. When he smiled at something, Mrs. Patterson said, his whole face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Anna Mae, dear, would you show Mr. Mitchell to the parlor while I check my records?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "There might be space in the old storage room if we can clear it out." Anna Mae's cheeks burned. She hated meeting new people, hated the way they looked at her crooked body with pity or disgust. But Mrs. Patterson was already bustling away, leaving her alone with the stranger. "You don't have to trouble yourself, miss." Caleb Mitchell's voice was gentle. "I can wait here. It's no trouble." Anna Mae stood slowly, trying to hide the way her back ached from sitting too long. "The parlor's just through here." She led him through the narrow hallway, acutely aware of her limping gait and the way her weak arm hung at her side. Most people either stared or looked away quickly, embarrassed by her deformity. But when she glanced back at Mr. Mitchell, he was simply following her with patient courtesy. The parlor was cozy, with a fire crackling in the stone fireplace and comfortable chairs arranged around a worn rug. Anna Mae gestured to the best chair, then retreated to the shadows by the window. "Thank you, Miss Robertson." Anna Mae Robertson. She kept her voice low, hoping he wouldn't try to make conversation. Small talk was torture when you had nothing interesting to say about your life. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Robertson." He settled into the chair, but didn't relax completely, as if he sensed her discomfort and didn't want to impose. "That's a beautiful quilt you were working on in the kitchen." Anna Mae blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to notice her sewing, much less comment on it. "Thank you. It's just mending, really. Nothing fancy." "Still beautiful work. Takes skill to make repairs look so neat." He leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes warm with genuine interest. "My mother used to say that mending was harder than making something new. Takes patience and care to fix what's broken." Something in his voice made Anna Mae look at him more closely. There was no pity in his expression, no uncomfortable politeness. He seemed to actually mean what he said. Do you sew, Mr. Mitchell?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He chuckled, a warm sound that made her stomach flutter strangely. "Not well, I'm afraid. I can manage to patch a torn seam, but anything fancier is beyond me. I've been meaning to find someone who could help with some mending, actually." Before Anna Mae could respond, Mrs. Patterson returned with a triumphant smile. "Good news, Mr. Mitchell. I can fix up the storage room for you. It's small, but it's warm and dry." "That sounds perfect, ma'am. I'm grateful for any roof over my head." He stood and pulled out a small leather pouch. "What would you like for rent?" As they discussed terms, Anna Mae found herself watching Caleb Mitchell with growing curiosity. He was different from the other miners she'd met. Quieter, more thoughtful. There was something about him that made her feel less alone, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. "Miss Robertson?" His voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might be willing to help with some mending. I have a coat that's seen better days." Anna Mae's heart jumped. Oh, yes, I suppose I could look at it. Wonderful. I'll bring it by tomorrow, if that's convenient. After he left to move his things, Mrs. Patterson found Anna Mae still standing by the window, watching his tall figure disappear into the swirling snow. He seems nice, the older woman observed casually. I suppose. Anna Mae tried to keep her voice neutral, but she could feel her cheeks warming. Handsome too, and polite. Not like some of these rough miners. Mrs. Patterson. Anna Mae's voice held a warning note. I'm just saying, dear. Sometimes good things come when we least expect them. That night, Anna Mae lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl around the boarding house. She couldn't stop thinking about Caleb Mitchell's kind eyes and gentle voice. For the first time in months, she felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope, but hope was dangerous for someone like her. Hope led to disappointment, and she'd had enough disappointment to last a lifetime. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself wondering what his coat looked like, and whether she'd be able to make it look good as new. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the rough mining town in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. In the morning, the world would be transformed, full of possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. The next morning brought a storm that rattled the windows and piled snow 3 feet high against the boarding house door. Anna Mae woke to the sound of wind howling like a living thing, and her first thought was that no one would venture out in such weather. She was wrong. A knock at the kitchen door made her look up from her breakfast of porridge and weak coffee. Through the frost-covered glass, she could make out a tall figure, bundled in a heavy coat, snow swirling around him, like he was fighting a battle with winter itself. Mercy me, who's fool enough to be out in this? Mrs. Patterson hurried to unlatch the door, and Caleb Mitchell stumbled inside, shaking snow from his hat and shoulders. Morning, ladies. Sorry to bother you so early. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his eyes sparkled with good humor despite the bitter weather. I brought that coat I mentioned, Miss Robertson. Anna Mae nearly choked on her porridge. You came out in this storm for a coat that needs mending? Had to head to the mine anyway. Thought I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He pulled a bundle of brown wool from under his arm, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth to keep it dry. Though I admit, the storm's worse than I expected. Mrs. Patterson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. The mine's closed today, you silly man. Nobody's working in weather like this. Sit yourself down and have some coffee before you catch your death. As Caleb settled at the kitchen table, Anna Mae unwrapped his coat with careful fingers. The wool was good quality, but worn thin in places, with a long tear along one sleeve and missing buttons. It was the kind of damage that told stories. Hard work, rough living, a man who took care of his things but couldn't always prevent wear and tear. This is good wool, she murmured, running her fingers along the torn seam. English, I think. Belonged to my father? Caleb's voice grew quiet. He brought it west when he came to California for the gold rush. Never found much gold, but he wore that coat for 20 years. Anna Mae looked up, startled by the tenderness in his voice. It must mean a lot to you. It does, which is why I want someone skilled to fix it properly. His brown eyes met hers across the table. Mrs. Patterson says, you're the best seamstress in Silver Creek. Heat rushed to Anna Mae's cheeks. No one had ever called her the best at anything before. I don't know about that. Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson said firmly, setting a steaming cup of coffee in front of Caleb. You've got a gift with needle and thread, child. Don't let anyone tell you different. Anna Mae bent her head over the coat, using her examination of the damage to hide her flushed face. She could fix this. In fact, she was already planning how to reinforce the weak spots and replace the missing buttons with ones that would complement the brown wool. How long have you been in Silver Creek, Mr. Mitchell? Mrs. Patterson asked, settling down with her own cup of coffee. About 6 months now. Came up from Virginia City when my claim there played out. He cradled the warm cup in his cold hands. Figured I'd try my luck in new territory. And how's that working for you? Caleb's smile was rueful. About as well as you'd expect. The easy gold's gone, And what's left requires more luck than skill. But I'm not ready to give up yet. What will you do if the mining doesn't work out? Anna Mae found herself asking, then immediately regretted speaking up. She didn't want to seem too interested in his personal business. I've been thinking about that. He leaned back in his chair, his expression growing thoughtful. I've always wanted to try ranching. There's good grazing land in the valleys, and with the mining camps needing beef. That takes money to start, Mrs. Patterson observed practically. Some, but mostly it takes hard work and patience. Two things I've got plenty of. His eyes found Anna Mae's again. What about you, Miss Robertson? Have you always lived in Silver Creek? Anna Mae's throat tightened. Her story wasn't one she liked to tell. The fever that had nearly killed her. The stepfather who'd made her life miserable. The long journey west that had left her stranded in this remote mining town with nowhere else to go. I came here 2 years ago, she said carefully. From back east. Family? The simple question hit her like a physical blow. She thought of her mother, weak and frightened, married to a man who used his fists to solve problems. She thought of her stepfather Marcus, who saw her as nothing more than damaged goods to be gotten rid of at the first opportunity. My mother remarried. She managed. Her new husband. We didn't get along. Something in her tone must have warned Caleb not to pursue the subject, because he simply nodded and changed the topic. Well, Silver Creek's lucky to have you. I've heard nothing but good things about your needlework. From who? Anna Mae couldn't hide her surprise. Mrs. Henderson at the general store. She mentioned you'd mended her husband's best shirt so well that it looked better than new. Caleb's smile was warm and encouraging. Said you had magic in your fingers. Anna Mae ducked her head, overwhelmed by the unexpected praise. She wasn't used to people noticing her work, much less commenting on it favorably. Most folks saw her as the crippled girl who lived at the boarding house. Useful for small tasks, but not worth much attention otherwise. I like fixing things, she whispered. That's a rare gift, Caleb said quietly. Most people prefer to throw away what's broken and start fresh. Takes a special person to see the value in mending. The wind gusted outside, rattling the windows and reminding them all of the storm raging beyond the warm kitchen walls. Anna Mae bent over the coat, using her needle to carefully begin separating the torn edges so she could see exactly what needed to be done. You know, Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully, this storm's likely to last most of the day. Mr. Mitchell, you're welcome to stay here, where it's warm, instead of trudging back to that cold room of yours. That's kind of you, but I don't want to impose. No imposition. Anna Mae could use the company while she works, and I've got plenty of food to share. Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled with mischief. Unless you'd rather freeze in that tiny room with nothing but your own thoughts for company. Caleb chuckled. When you put it that way, I'd be foolish to refuse. As the morning wore on, Anna Mae found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced in months. Caleb proved to be excellent company. Quiet when she needed to concentrate, but ready with gentle conversation when she looked up from her work. He didn't seem bothered by her slow speech or the way she had to stop frequently to rest her weak hand. Tell me about this pattern, he said, pointing to the intricate stitching along the coat's collar. Anna Mae's face lit up. It's called French seaming. You fold the raw edges and stitch them twice, so there's no fraying, and it looks finished on both sides. She demonstrated with a scrap of fabric, her good hand moving with practiced skill. Clever. And beautiful, too. Caleb watched her work with genuine interest. How did you learn to sew like that? My grandmother taught me before she died. She said a woman should know how to make beautiful things with her hands, no matter what else life brought her way. Anna Mae's voice grew soft with memory. She used to say that every stitch was a prayer, and every mended tear was proof that broken things could be made whole again. Wise woman, she was. She never made me feel like there was anything wrong with me. Anna Mae's throat tightened with old grief. She said my arm might not work right, but my heart was perfect. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, His voice was gentle but firm. She was right, you know. Anna Mae's needle stilled. What? Your grandmother. She was right about your heart. He leaned forward slightly, his brown eyes serious. I can see it in everything you do. The way you care for Mrs. Patterson. The way you put such love into your sewing. The way you worry about making my father's coat perfect even though you've never met him. Tears threatened to spill over. But these weren't the bitter tears she'd grown used to. These felt different. Warmer. Like something long frozen was finally beginning to thaw. She started, then stopped, not sure how to respond to such unexpected kindness. I'm sorry, Caleb said quickly. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Sometimes I speak before I think. No, it's nice, what you said. Anna Mae looked down at her hands, fighting to find the right words. People don't usually, most folks see me as broken? Caleb's voice was quiet but steady. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then they're not really looking. He reached across the table and gently touched her good hand where it rested on the coat. I see someone who can take torn things and make them beautiful again. Someone who puts love into every stitch. Someone who cares so much about doing things right that she'll spend hours on a coat belonging to a stranger. His touch was warm and calloused from hard work, but infinitely gentle. Anna Mae stared down at their joined hands, hardly able to believe what was happening. When had anyone ever touched her with such tenderness? When had anyone ever seen past her twisted body to whatever lay beneath? Miss Robertson, Anna Mae. Caleb's voice was hesitant, as if he was testing how her name felt on his tongue. Would you mind if I stayed to watch you work? I promise not to bother you. But there's something peaceful about watching skilled hands create something beautiful. Anna Mae's heart hammered against her ribs. You'd want to do that? Very much. She nodded shyly and settled back to her work with Caleb's warm presence beside her. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the kitchen, something new and fragile was beginning to bloom. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. But could someone like her really dare to hope for more than just survival? You're going to wear a hole in that floor if you keep pacing like that. Mrs. Place. Patterson's voice cut through Anna Mae's anxious thoughts as she walked back and forth across the boarding house parlor for the 100th time that evening. 3 weeks had passed since the snowstorm, and something wonderful and terrifying was happening. Caleb Mitchell had become a regular visitor, stopping by each evening after his work at the mine. What started as simple mending jobs had grown into shared meals, long conversations by the fire, and moments that made Anna Mae's heart race in ways she'd never experienced. He's late tonight, Anna Mae murmured, pressing her face to the frost-covered window. The street outside was empty, except for a stray dog sniffing around the general store's steps. Maybe the mine ran late. You know how Mr. Garrett pushes the men when he thinks he's close to a new vein. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her knitting, her eyes twinkling with knowing amusement. Or maybe he's planning something special. Anna Mae's cheeks warmed. What do you mean? Oh, nothing. Just that a man doesn't spend 3 weeks courting a young lady without having serious intentions. Courting? Anna Mae's voice came out as a squeak. We're not. He's just being friendly. Mrs. Patterson snorted. Friendly, my foot. That boy looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. And don't think I haven't noticed how you light up whenever he walks through that door. Before Anna Mae could protest, the sound of boots on the front porch made her heart leap. She smoothed her skirts and tried to look calm as Mrs. Patterson went to answer the door. Evening, ma'am. Caleb's voice carried the chill of the November air. Is Miss Robertson available? Of course, dear. Come in before you freeze solid. Anna Mae turned from the window, a smile already spreading across her face. But the expression died when she saw Caleb's appearance. His clothes were cleaner than usual, and he carried a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. More importantly, there was something in his eyes, a mixture of hope and fear that made her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. Anna Mae. He stopped just inside the parlor, suddenly looking uncertain. I was wondering. That is, I hoped. Would you take a walk with me? It's nearly dark, she said, confused. And cold. I know. But there's something I want to show you. Something special. His voice was gentle but urgent. Please? Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, Anna Mae's heaviest cloak in her hands. Go on, dear. The fresh air will do you good. Minutes later, Anna Mae found herself walking down Silver Creek's main street beside Caleb, her good arm tucked through his for warmth and support. The late autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine trees and the distant smoke from a dozen chimneys. Where are we going? She asked as they passed the last of the town's buildings and headed toward the hills beyond. Not far. Just to the old oak tree by Miller's Creek. Caleb's voice held barely contained excitement. Trust me? Anna Mae nodded, though her weak lungs were already protesting the uphill walk. Caleb seemed to sense her difficulty and slowed his pace, never making her feel rushed or burdensome. The oak tree stood alone on a small rise overlooking the valley, its massive trunk scarred by decades of wind and weather. In summer, it provided cool shade for picnickers. Tonight, it stood silhouetted against the first stars, its bare branches reaching toward the darkening sky like gnarled fingers. This is my favorite spot in the whole territory, Caleb said softly as they reached the tree. You can see everything from here. The town, the mountains, the way the creek winds through the valley like a silver ribbon. Anna Mae looked around, trying to see what he saw. The view was pretty enough, she supposed, but mostly it just reminded her of how small and isolated their little mining camp really was. It's nice, she said politely, but that's not why I brought you here. Caleb turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Anna Mae, these past few weeks, they've been the best of my life. Her heart started beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Caleb, please, let me finish. I need to say this before I lose my nerve. He took her hands in his touch warm despite the cold air. I know we haven't known each other long. I know there are probably a dozen reasons why this is crazy. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just friendship. Anna Mae's world tilted on its axis. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. The words hung in the air between them like visible things, solid and real, and impossible to take back. I love your kindness, your skill with a needle, the way you see beauty in broken things. I love how you make me want to be a better man. Tears spilled down Anna Mae's cheeks before she could stop them. You don't understand. I'm not. I can't. You can't what? I can't be a real wife. The words burst out of her like water through a broken dam. Dr. Hartwell examined me. He said my body is too damaged, that I'll never bear children. What kind of man wants a wife who can't give him a family? Caleb was quiet for so long that Anna Mae began to panic. This was it. The moment when he would realize his mistake, when he would see her for what she really was. Damaged goods, just like the doctor said. Do you remember what you told me about your grandmother? He asked finally. The question caught her off guard. What? You said she told you that every mended tear was proof that broken things could be made whole again. His hands tightened on hers. Anna Mae, you're not broken. You're just beautifully mended. But the children would be a blessing if they came. But they're not why I love you. His voice was steady and sure. I love you because when I'm with you, I feel like I've found the missing piece of myself. Because you make me laugh and think and dream of futures I never imagined. Because you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. Anna Mae stared at him through her tears, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You really mean that? Every word. He released one of her hands to reach for the brown paper bundle. Which is why I wanted to give you this. With trembling fingers, Anna Mae unwrapped the package. Inside was a length of the most beautiful blue fabric she'd ever seen. Silk, the color of a clear summer sky, soft as a whisper and shimmering in the starlight. Caleb, this is... Where did you get this? Ordered it special from San Francisco. Took 6 weeks to arrive. His voice was shy now, uncertain. "I thought, if you were willing, you could make yourself a dress. A wedding dress." Anna Mae's breath caught in her throat. Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am." He dropped to one knee, right there in the dirt, still holding her hands. "Anna Mae Robertson, will you be my wife? Will you build a life with me? Help me turn that dream ranch into reality? Will you let me love you for the rest of our days?" The world went very still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Anna Mae stared down at this impossible man who somehow saw worth in her broken body and damaged dreams. Dr. Hartwell's cruel words echoed in her mind, warring with the tenderness in Caleb's eyes. "I want to," she whispered. "But what if he's right? What if I disappoint you? What if—" "Anna Mae." Caleb rose and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "The only thing that could disappoint me is if you said no because you believed lies someone else told you about your worth." Before she could lose her nerve, before doubt could steal this moment away, Anna Mae whispered the word that would change everything. "Yes." Caleb's whoop of joy echoed off the mountains, and then he was spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. When he set her down, he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and finally her lips, with a tenderness that made her feel precious beyond measure. "We'll be happy," he promised against her mouth. "I'll spend every day making sure you know how loved you are." As they walked back toward town, Anna Mae clutched the blue silk to her chest and allowed herself to believe, for the first time in her life, that maybe broken things really could be made beautiful again. But happiness, she would soon learn, was a fragile thing that could be shattered by ghosts from the past. 3 days later, as Anna Mae sat in Mrs. Patterson's parlor, carefully cutting pattern pieces from the precious blue silk, Jeremiah the postmaster appeared at the door with a telegram that would change everything. "Message for Miss Robertson," he said, his usually cheerful face grave with concern. Anna Mae's hands shook as she opened the yellow paper. The words seemed to leap off the page like black spiders, poisoning her newfound joy with familiar terror. "Received word of your engagement. Arrangements made with San Francisco merchant, coming to collect you. Do not embarrass the family further. Marcus Webb." The telegram fluttered to the floor as Anna Mae's world crumbled around her. Her stepfather had found her. After 2 years of blessed freedom, Marcus Webb was coming to Silver Creek. And when he arrived, everything she dared to hope for would be destroyed. Because Marcus Webb never let go of what he considered his property. And in his eyes, Anna Mae belonged to him until the day he decided to get rid of her for good. Thunder rolled across the mountains as Anna Mae crumpled the telegram in her shaking fists, the paper cutting into her palms like tiny knives. Outside Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, the first November storm of the season was building, and the wind howled through the streets of Silver Creek like a living thing, hungry for destruction. "Anna Mae? What is it, child?" Mrs. Patterson's voice seemed to come from very far away, though she was standing right beside the parlor chair. "He's coming." The words fell from Anna Mae's lips like stones into still water. "Marcus is coming for me." Who's Marcus? But even as Mrs. Patterson asked, understanding was already dawning in her kind eyes. She'd seen enough frightened women in her 60 years to recognize the particular terror that came from running from a man's fists. Anna Mae couldn't answer. The room was spinning around her, and she felt like she was drowning in memories she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. Marcus Webb standing over her bed, his gold-topped cane gleaming in the lamplight, his voice, smooth as poisoned honey, explaining why she deserved the bruises that painted her skin purple and black. His hands, always so careful to leave marks where they wouldn't show. "He's my stepfather," she finally managed to whisper. "My mother married him when I was 12. He doesn't believe in letting go of what belongs to him." Mrs. Patterson's face hardened like granite. "And he thinks you belong to him?" "He thinks everyone belongs to him." Anna Mae's voice was flat, empty of all the joy that had filled it just hours earlier. "My mother, me, even the servants. We're all just pieces on his chessboard, to be moved around as he sees fit. The older woman sat down heavily in the chair across from her. What will you do? I don't know. Anna Mae stared at the beautiful blue silk scattered across the floor where it had fallen when the telegram arrived. Just this morning, she'd been planning her wedding dress, dreaming of a future filled with love and laughter. Now, those dreams felt as fragile as soap bubbles, ready to pop at the first touch of reality. You could run again. Where? Anna Mae's laugh was bitter as winter wind. He found me once. He'll find me again. Marcus has money, connections, private detectives. There's nowhere I can go that he won't eventually track me down. Then you fight. Anna Mae looked up sharply. Fight? You don't understand. Marcus isn't just cruel. He's powerful. He owns half the judges in California, has politicians in his pocket. Even if I tried to fight him legally, he'd destroy me. I'm not talking about legal fights, child. Mrs. Patterson's eyes glittered with a fierce light that Anna Mae had never seen before. I'm talking about standing your ground. You're not a helpless 12-year-old anymore. You're a grown woman with people who care about you. Before Anna Mae could respond, the front door burst open and Caleb rushed in, his hair dripping wet from the rain and his face tight with worry. Anna Mae! Jeremiah said he delivered bad news. What's wrong? He stopped short when he saw her tear-stained face and the crumpled telegram on the floor. What happened? My stepfather is coming for me. The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. He's arranged a marriage for me in San Francisco. He's coming to take me away. Caleb's face went very still. Over my dead body. You don't understand. Marcus isn't the kind of man you can reason with or fight fair. He'll hurt you. Hurt Mrs. Patterson. Hurt anyone who tries to stand in his way. Anna Mae's voice rose with panic. He won't hesitate to destroy this whole town if that's what it takes to get what he wants. Let him try. Caleb's voice was quiet, but deadly serious. Anna Mae, we're engaged to be married. That means you're under my protection now. Marriage to him? Anna Mae pointed at the telegram with a trembling finger. Marcus doesn't care about our engagement. In his mind, I'm still his property until he signs the papers transferring ownership to someone else. The words hung in the air like a curse. Caleb's face flushed red with anger and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. No one owns you, he said through gritted teeth. You're not property to be bought and sold. Try telling that to Marcus. Anna Mae buried her face in her hands. Oh God, what am I going to do? I can't marry you now. I can't drag you into this mess. You have no idea what he's capable of. Then tell me. Caleb knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle but insistent. Help me understand what we're dealing with. Anna Mae's whole body shook as the memories she'd fought so hard to bury came rushing back. He used to beat my mother when she displeased him. Never where it would show, always careful to avoid her face or hands. When I tried to protect her, she touched her twisted arm unconsciously. He said I was clumsy, that I'd fallen down the stairs. The doctor believed him. Mrs. Patterson made a sound like a wounded animal. The fever that damaged your arm. There was no fever. Anna Mae's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus pushed me down a flight of stairs when I was 7 because I spilled wine on his carpet. I landed wrong, broke my arm and my ribs. He told everyone I was delirious with fever, that I was making up stories. Caleb's face had gone white as fresh snow. And your mother believed him? My mother was too scared to do anything else. Marcus controlled everything, the money, the house, even who she was allowed to talk to. If she'd tried to leave him or expose what he did, he would have destroyed her completely. Anna Mae's voice grew smaller with each word. He used to tell her that no one would want a woman with a crippled daughter anyway. My God. Caleb's voice was thick with horror and rage. Anna Mae, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. How could you? I've spent 2 years trying to forget. Trying to build a new life where none of that mattered. She looked down at her engagement ring. A simple gold band with a tiny diamond that had belonged to Caleb's grandmother. But the past has a way of catching up. doesn't it? Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning illuminated the parlor in stark white light. In that moment, Anna Mae saw herself as Marcus would see her. Small, scared, broken. The same frightened girl who'd cowered in corners and learned to make herself invisible to avoid his attention. "I have to leave," she said suddenly, standing up so fast that her weak legs nearly buckled. "Tonight, before he gets here, maybe if I'm gone, he'll leave you and Mrs. Patterson alone." "Absolutely not." Caleb rose too, his face set with determination. "Running away is exactly what he expects you to do. It's what he's counting on." "Then what do you suggest?" "We can't fight him, Caleb. He has too much power, too much money." "Maybe we can't fight his money, Mrs. Money," Patterson said slowly, "but we can fight his expectations. Men like Marcus Webb are used to people being afraid of them. They count on fear to keep their victims in line." "And what happens when fear isn't enough?" Anna Mae's voice cracked. "What happens when he decides to use his fists instead of his influence?" Caleb took her hands in his touch warm and steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "Then he'll learn that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. I won't let you get hurt because of me. And I won't let you sacrifice your happiness because of a bully who thinks he owns you." Caleb's brown eyes blazed with fierce protectiveness. "Anna Mae, we have something he'll never understand. People who choose to love each other, not because they have to, but because they want to. Love isn't always enough," she whispered. "Maybe not, but it's a start." He lifted her chin until she was looking directly into his eyes. "Tell me, you trust me. Tell me, you believe that together we can face whatever he throws at us." Anna Mae wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being longed to believe that love could conquer the darkness of her past. But Marcus Webb cast a long shadow, and she'd lived in that shadow for too many years to easily step into the light. "I want to trust you," she said finally. "But I'm scared. I'm so scared that I can barely breathe." "That's okay. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Caleb pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We'll face this together, one day at a time. And when Marcus Webb arrives in Silver Creek, he'll find that his little victim has grown up to be a woman with people who love her." Outside, the storm raged on, and somewhere in that darkness, Anna Mae knew her stepfather was coming closer with every passing hour. Marcus Webb had always been a force of nature, unpredictable, destructive, and utterly without mercy. But for the first time in her life, Anna Mae wasn't facing him alone. She had Caleb's love, Mrs. Patterson's fierce loyalty, and maybe, just maybe, the strength to finally stand up to the man who had stolen so much of her life. The question was, would it be enough when the real battle began? The black carriage rolled down Silver Creek's main street like a funeral wagon, its wheels churning mud and its brass fittings gleaming despite the gray February sky. Anna Mae watched from behind Mrs. Patterson's lace curtains as four matched horses came to a halt outside the boarding house, their breath steaming in the bitter cold. Marcus Webb stepped down from the carriage with the confidence of a king entering his conquered territory. At 60, he remained an imposing figure, tall and silver-haired, dressed in an expensive black coat that probably cost more than most miners made in a year. His gold-topped cane caught what little sunlight filtered through the clouds as he surveyed the rough mining town with obvious distaste. "He looks like an undertaker," Mrs. Patterson muttered, peering over Anna Mae's shoulder. "He is, in a way." Anna Mae's voice was steady, though her hands trembled against the windowsill. "He buries people's dreams for a living." The past 3 months had changed her in ways she was still discovering. The frightened girl who'd received that first telegram was gone, replaced by a woman who'd learned to stand straight despite her crooked spine. Caleb's love had given her something she'd never possessed before, the knowledge that she was worth fighting for. Marcus climbed the front steps with measured precision, each footfall deliberate as a judge's gavel. When his fist struck the door, the sound echoed through the boarding house like a death knell. "Miss Robertson." His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to immediate obedience. I know you're in there. Open this door before I lose my patience. Mrs. Patterson squared her shoulders and marched to the entryway, her small frame radiating righteous fury. This is my house, Mr. Webb. You'll mind your manners or find yourself back on the street. Marcus's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Ah, the landlady. How quaint. He pushed past her without invitation, his pale eyes scanning the modest parlor with undisguised contempt. Where is she? I'm here, Marcus. Anna Mae stepped into the parlor, her chin raised and her spine as straight as she could make it. She'd chosen her best dress for this confrontation, a deep green wool that Caleb said brought out her eyes. Her hair was pinned up in a style that made her look older, more confident than the cowering child Marcus remembered. For a moment, something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or calculation. Then his familiar cold smile settled into place. There you are, my dear. You've led me quite a chase. His eyes traveled over her with the same expression he might use to evaluate livestock. You look different. Healthier, I suppose, though still disappointingly crooked. What do you want, Marcus? Direct. I like that. Very well. He removed his gloves with deliberate care, then fixed her with a stare that had once made her wet herself in terror. I want you to collect your things and come home where you belong. I've arranged an excellent marriage for you, a merchant in San Francisco who needs a housekeeper more than a wife. He's willing to overlook your defects. In exchange for a substantial dowry, I'm already engaged. Marcus's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. To a dirt-poor miner? My dear girl, surely you jest. What could such a man possibly offer you? Love. The word came out stronger than Anna Mae had expected. Respect. A future where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can be sold for. Love. Marcus spoke the word like it tasted bad. How charmingly naive. Love doesn't put food on the table or clothes on your back. Love doesn't cure the fact that you're a crippled spinster with no prospects. I'm not a spinster. I'm engaged to be married. Not anymore. Marcus reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. This is a contract of sale, signed by your mother as your legal guardian. It transfers all rights and responsibilities for your care to the merchant I've chosen. The wedding is set for next month. Anna Mae's blood turned to ice water. You can't do that. I'm 22 years old. My mother has no legal authority over me. Doesn't she? Marcus's smile widened. According to the medical documents I've provided to the court, you're mentally incompetent due to your physical infirmities. Your mother, as your closest relative, has been granted guardianship to protect you from making foolish decisions. The room spun around Anna Mae like a child's top. That's impossible. There were no court proceedings. I would have been notified. Not if the court believes you're too unstable to participate in your own defense. Marcus unfolded the document with theatrical precision. Dr. Hartwell's testimony was particularly helpful. He described you as delusional, prone to hysteria, and completely incapable of caring for yourself. Dr. Hartwell said no such thing. Didn't he? Are you certain? Memory can be so unreliable in cases of mental deficiency. Marcus's voice dripped false sympathy. But don't worry, my dear. Your new husband understands your limitations. He's promised to keep you safely locked away where you can't harm yourself or others. The world tilted sideways as the full scope of Marcus's plan became clear. He hadn't just come to drag her home. He'd systematically destroyed her legal standing, turning her into property that could be bought and sold like livestock. You monster. Mrs. Patterson's voice shook with rage. How dare you speak to her that way? The old woman can mind her own business, Marcus said without looking away from Anna Mae. This is a family matter. Like hell it is. The new voice cut through the tension, like a knife through silk. Caleb stood in the parlor doorway, his face calm, but his eyes promising violence. Behind him, Anna Mae glimpsed several other figures, miners from the camp, their faces grim with purpose. Marcus turned, his smile faltering slightly. Ah, the famous fiancé. How predictable. Mr. Webb. Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. You're not welcome here. I'm afraid my business takes precedence over your feelings, young man. Marcus straightened to his full height, using his inches of advantage like a weapon. Anna Mae is coming with me. Legally, she has no choice. Legally, you're a lying snake who's falsified documents to steal a woman's freedom. Caleb stepped into the room, and Anna Mae felt some of her panic recede. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. Strong words from a man with no legal standing whatsoever. Marcus's hand moved to his cane, and Anna Mae flinched instinctively. I suggest you step aside before this becomes unpleasant. The only thing unpleasant here is you. Caleb moved closer, his movements controlled but predatory. And if you think you're taking Anna Mae anywhere against her will, you're about to learn how wrong you can be. Marcus laughed, but the sound held less confidence than before. You can't fight the law, boy. I have official documents signed by a judge. Then you won't mind if we ride to the county seat and verify those documents with the court, will you? Sheriff Coleman stepped through the doorway, his badge gleaming on his vest and his hand resting casually on his gun. Seems like there might be some questions about the authenticity of your paperwork. For the first time since entering the boarding house, Marcus Webb looked uncertain. His pale eyes darted between the sheriff, Caleb, and the growing crowd of miners blocking his escape route. This is preposterous, he blustered. I demand safe passage to complete my business. Your business is done here, Sheriff Coleman said firmly. Miss Robertson is a free citizen of Montana Territory, and she's made her choice clear. You can accept that and leave peacefully, or I can arrest you for attempted kidnapping. Marcus's face flushed red with fury. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Sheriff. I have influence that reaches far beyond this miserable little camp. Maybe so, but your influence ends at my jail cell door. The sheriff's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You've got two choices, Webb. Leave now, or leave in chains. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Anna Mae held her breath, waiting for Marcus to explode into the violence she remembered from her childhood. Instead, he carefully folded the forged documents and slipped them back into his coat. This isn't over, he said quietly, his voice more dangerous than any shout. You think you've won something here, but you have no idea what you've started. As he moved toward the door, his cold gaze fixed on Anna Mae one last time. Enjoy your little romance while you can, my dear. Men like him always grow tired of broken toys eventually. The words hit their target like poisoned arrows, and Anna Mae felt doubt creep back into her heart. What if Marcus was right? What if Caleb's love was just pity in disguise? But then Caleb was beside her, his strong arm around her waist, and his whispered words drove the shadows away. He's wrong, Anna Mae, about everything, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Spring arrived early in the mountains that year, melting the snow into rushing streams that sang their way down to the valleys below. Anna Mae stood in the meadow Caleb had described so many months ago, her hands resting on the gentle swell of her belly, watching her husband repair the fence around their small homestead. 6 months had passed since Marcus Webb's defeat in the boarding house parlor, and the world had transformed in ways Anna Mae could never have imagined. The merchant in San Francisco had withdrawn his offer when Sheriff Coleman contacted him about the forged documents. Marcus himself had slunk back to California with his tail between his legs, his reputation in ruins after word spread about his attempted kidnapping. But the greatest transformation was the one growing inside Anna Mae herself. Impossible, Dr. Franz-too, Hartwell had muttered when she'd visited him the month before, his hands shaking as he examined her rounded form. According to every medical text I've studied, this should not be happening. Anna Mae had simply smiled and placed her hands protectively over her baby. Some miracles couldn't be explained by medical texts. The fence is finished, Caleb called out, wiping sweat from his forehead as he walked toward her through the wildflowers. Even after months of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart skip like a stone across what? Just in time, she replied, accepting his gentle kiss. Mrs. Patterson should arrive any minute with the supplies from town. They'd built their cabin in the meadow Caleb had dreamed of, surrounded by mountains that stood like ancient guardians against the sky. It was small but sturdy, with windows that caught the morning light and a garden where Anna Mae grew vegetables and herbs. Most importantly, it was theirs, a place where love lived in every corner and hope grew like wildflowers after rain. The sound of wagon wheels announced Mrs. Patterson's arrival, and Anna Mae waved as the familiar figure drove up the winding path to their door. The older woman had become like a mother to both of them, visiting weekly and fussing over Anna Mae's pregnancy, like a hen with one precious chick. "How are you feeling today, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked, as Caleb helped her down from the wagon seat. "Like I swallowed a watermelon," Anna Mae laughed, one hand supporting her aching back. "This baby seems determined to be born a giant." "Strong babies run in Caleb's family," Mrs. Patterson observed with satisfaction. "His grandmother was built like a sparrow, but birthed 10 healthy children, each one bigger than the last." As they unloaded supplies and settled in for tea, Anna Mae marveled at how normal this felt. This quiet domestic happiness that had once seemed as distant as the stars. Her twisted arms still ached on cold mornings, her spine still curved like a question mark. But somehow, these things no longer defined her worth. "Any word from your mother?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently. Anna Mae's smile faltered slightly. 3 letters had arrived from California over the past months, tentative reaching out from a woman who was finally beginning to escape her own prison. Marcus's public humiliation had weakened his hold over her mother, and for the first time in years, Eleanor Robertson was finding her voice. "She wants to visit after the baby is born," Anna Mae said carefully, "to meet her grandchild." "And how do you feel about that?" "Scared, hopeful, confused." Anna Mae's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "Part of me wants to slam the door in her face for all the years she let him hurt me. But another part remembers the mother she was before Marcus, when she used to sing me lullabies and braid my hair." Caleb reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." "I know you will." Anna Mae's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that someone like you could love someone like me." "Someone like you?" Mrs. Patterson's voice held gentle reproof. "You mean someone strong enough to survive years of abuse and still have love left to give? Someone skilled enough to turn scraps of fabric into works of art? Someone brave enough to stand up to a man who terrorized her for years?" "I'm not brave," Anna Mae protested. "I was terrified the whole time." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, child. It means you do what's right, despite being scared." Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled with pride. "And you've been the bravest person I know." As the afternoon wore on, they talked of ordinary things. The garden, the approaching birth, Caleb's plans to expand their small herd of cattle. But beneath the everyday conversation, Anna Mae felt the deep contentment of a woman who had finally found her place in the world. When evening came and Mrs. Patterson prepared to leave, she pressed a small wrapped package into Anna Mae's hands. "What is it?" Anna Mae asked. But Mrs. Patterson just smiled mysteriously. "Open it when you're alone with Caleb. It's something every new mother should have." After the wagon disappeared down the mountain path, Anna Mae and Caleb sat on their front porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The package lay unopened in her lap, its contents a pleasant mystery. "Shall we see what Mrs. Patterson brought you?" Caleb asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Anna Mae carefully unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small wooden box, worn smooth by years of handling. Inside, nestled in faded silk, was a delicate silver locket engraved with tiny roses. "It's beautiful," Anna Mae breathed, lifting the locket to catch the starlight. "There's something inside," Caleb observed, pointing to the tiny clasp. Anna Mae opened the locket with trembling fingers. On one side was a miniature photograph of a young woman who looked remarkably like herself. On the other side, in Mrs. Patterson's careful script, were the words, "For Anna Mae, Proof that broken things can bloom again. Love, Mother Patterson. Tears spilled down Anna Mae's cheeks as she realized the truth. The photograph was of Mrs. Patterson as a young woman, a Mrs. Patterson who had once been broken herself, who had survived her own darkness to become a beacon of light for others. She understands, Anna Mae whispered. She really understands. As Caleb fastened the locket around her neck, Anna Mae felt the last chains of her past finally fall away. She was not damaged goods. She was not a burden to be endured or a problem to be solved. She was a woman loved completely and without reservation, carrying new life that would be born into a world filled with hope. The baby kicked against her ribs as if agreeing with her thoughts, and Anna Mae laughed with pure joy. Soon, she would hold her child in her arms, would see love reflected in tiny features, and feel the miracle of new beginnings. Marcus Webb had been wrong about everything. Love was enough, not just to survive, but to flourish in ways that transformed broken dreams into beautiful realities. Under the Montana stars, with Caleb's love surrounding her like a warm embrace, Anna Mae Robertson Mitchell finally understood that her worth had never been determined by what others could see from the outside, but by the strength and love that had always lived within her heart. The first cry pierced the October dawn like a bell announcing the birth of hope itself, and Anna Mae Mitchell knew that everything she'd been told about her broken body had been a lie. She cradled her daughter against her chest, marveling at the perfect tiny fingers that gripped her thumb with fearless determination, and felt the final pieces of her shattered self-image fall away like autumn leaves. She's beautiful, Anna Mae, just like her mother. Caleb's voice cracked with emotion as he knelt beside their bed, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Outside their cabin window, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall. But inside, the world was warm, with new life and endless possibility. Dr. Hartwell stood in the corner, his medical bag forgotten, as he stared at the impossible scene before him. "I don't understand it," he muttered, shaking his gray head. "Every textbook I've studied said this couldn't happen. Your spine, your lungs, your general constitution. Maybe textbooks don't know everything about the human heart," Anna Mae said softly, her eyes never leaving her daughter's perfect face. The baby had Caleb's strong chin and Anna Mae's delicate nose, but her eyes were entirely her own, bright and curious, as if she was already planning adventures in the world beyond the cabin walls. "What will you name her?" Mrs. Patterson asked from her spot by the fireplace, where she was preparing warm broth for the new mother. The older woman had arrived 3 days earlier when Anna Mae's labor pains began, refusing to leave until she was certain both mother and baby were healthy. "Elena Rose," Anna Mae replied without hesitation. "Elena for strength, Rose for beauty, that blooms despite thorns." As if she understood her name, baby Elena opened her eyes and looked directly at her mother. In that moment, Anna Mae saw something that made her breath catch. Not just love, but recognition. This child knew her, had chosen her, had somehow found a way to exist, despite every medical opinion that said it was impossible. "She's strong," Caleb whispered, gently stroking his daughter's downy hair. "Listen to those lungs. She'll be climbing mountains before she's walking." Dr. Hartwell approached the bed slowly, his professional curiosity overcoming his shock. "May I examine her, just to ensure everything is normal?" Anna Mae nodded, though she never loosened her protective hold on Elena. The doctor's hands were gentle as he checked the baby's breathing, her reflexes, the steady rhythm of her tiny heart. "Remarkable," he breathed. "She's perfect in every way. Strong lungs, good muscle tone, excellent reflexes." He looked up at Anna Mae with something approaching awe. "Your body not only carried her to term, but it nourished her beautifully. I've never seen anything like it." "Maybe that's because you've never seen love work miracles before," Mrs. Patterson observed dryly. Anna Mae's body knew what it was doing, even if the rest of us had our doubts. Over the following weeks, as autumn gave way to winter's embrace, Anna Mae discovered that motherhood suited her in ways she'd never dared to imagine. Her supposedly weak lungs had no trouble staying up all night with a fussy baby. Her twisted arm, though still limited, proved perfectly capable of supporting Elena during feedings and diaper changes. Most surprisingly, her curved spine seemed to straighten slightly when she held her daughter, as if love itself was realigning her bones. "You're glowing," Caleb observed one evening as he found Anna Mae in the nursery corner of their cabin, rocking Elena by lamplight. "I've never seen you look so happy." "I feel like I'm finally the person I was meant to be," Anna Mae replied, her voice soft with wonder. "For so many years, I let other people's opinions define what I could and couldn't do. But Elena doesn't care about my crooked arm or my curved spine. She just knows I'm her mother. And that's enough." Caleb knelt beside the rocking chair, his large hand gentle on Elena's tiny back. "More than enough. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Anna Mae. Watching you become a mother has been like watching a flower bloom in fast motion." As winter deepened around their mountain home, unexpected visitors began arriving at their door. First came Sarah Henderson from the general store, bringing baby clothes she'd sewn herself and staying to marvel at Elena's bright alertness. Then came the wives of several miners, women who'd heard whispers of the miracle baby born to the supposedly barren woman. "My sister back in Ohio was told the same thing," confided Martha Coleman, the sheriff's wife, as she held Elena during one afternoon visit. "Doctors said her injuries from a riding accident made pregnancy impossible. She now has 4 healthy children and runs the most successful boarding house in Toledo. Seems like medical men don't know as much as they think they do," added Jane Morrison, whose own difficult pregnancy had nearly ended in tragedy. "Bodies have their own wisdom, especially when love is involved." These conversations planted seeds of doubt about everything Anna Mae had been taught about her limitations. If she could carry and deliver a healthy baby despite her physical challenges, what other impossibilities might actually be within her reach? The answer came in an unexpected form: a letter from her mother. "It's from California," Caleb said gently, placing the envelope in Anna Mae's hands as she nursed Elena by the fire. "Your mother's handwriting." Anna Mae's hands trembled as she opened the letter, Elena's warm weight against her chest, providing comfort as she read her mother's carefully written words. "My dearest Anna Mae, word has reached me of Elena's birth, and my heart overflows with joy for you. I know I have no right to ask, but I long to meet my granddaughter and to see the woman you've become. Marcus has left for the East Coast on business, and for the first time in years, I feel free to speak my own thoughts. I failed you terribly, my darling girl. I let fear make me weak when I should have been strong for you. I believed his lies about your worth because it was easier than fighting him, and I will regret that cowardice for the rest of my days. But perhaps it's not too late for us to find each other again. I am planning to leave Marcus permanently when he returns from his trip. I've saved enough money to start over, and I dream of a life where I can be the mother and grandmother I should have been all along. Would you be willing to see me? I understand if you refuse. I've given you every reason to hate me, but if there's any forgiveness left in your heart, I would be grateful for the chance to meet my granddaughter and to ask your pardon in person. All my love, Mother." Anna Mae read the letter twice, then handed it to Caleb with shaking hands. "She wants to come here, to meet Elena. How do you feel about that?" Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the protective concern in his eyes. Scared, angry, hopeful. Anna Mae touched Elena's soft cheek, drawing strength from her daughter's peaceful contentment. "Part of me wants to burn this letter and pretend it never came, but another part remembers the mother she was before Marcus, when she used to read me stories and promise that everything would be all right. What does your heart tell you?" Anna Mae was quiet for a long moment, listening to the wind howl around their cabin and feeling Elena's steady breathing against her chest. That forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing not to let it poison the future. "Then invite her to come," Caleb said simply. "We'll face whatever happens together, just like we always have. That night, as Elena slept peacefully in her cradle and Caleb dozed beside the fire, Anna Mae sat at their small table and carefully composed her reply. Dear mother, you may come, not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I want Elena to know that people can change, that broken things can be mended with patience and love. Come in the spring, when the wildflowers bloom in our meadow. Come ready to meet a granddaughter who proves that miracles happen every day, and a daughter who learned to see her own worth despite everything that tried to convince her otherwise. Come ready to begin again. Anna Mae. As she sealed the letter, Anna Mae felt the last weight of her past lift from her shoulders. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd fled to Montana Territory, believing herself worthless. She was a wife, a mother, a woman who'd discovered that love could indeed work miracles, not by changing what was broken, but by revealing the strength that had been there all along. Elena stirred in her sleep, as if sensing her mother's emotional transformation, and Anna Mae smiled as she hummed a gentle lullaby. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and fresh possibilities. But tonight, in this warm cabin surrounded by love, everything was exactly as it should be. 2 years had passed since Elena's birth, and the mountain meadow surrounding the Mitchell homestead had transformed from a simple cabin clearing into something resembling a small farm. Anna Mae stood in her kitchen garden, Elena toddling between the tomato plants while she harvested vegetables for the evening meal, and marveled at how full her life had become. Mama, matos! Elena's excited squeal drew Anna Mae's attention to her daughter, who had discovered a particularly large red tomato hanging low on its vine. At 2 years old, Elena was everything the doctors had said was impossible: healthy, bright, and absolutely fearless. Yes, sweetheart, tomatoes. Anna Mae laughed, scooping up her daughter and spinning her around until they were both dizzy with giggles. Should we pick some for Daddy's dinner? Elena nodded enthusiastically, her dark curls bouncing. She had inherited Caleb's adventurous spirit and Anna Mae's gentle nature, creating a combination that kept both parents constantly amazed. More importantly, she had grown up seeing her mother's twisted arm and curved spine as simply part of who Anna Mae was, never as flaws to be hidden or ashamed of. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their garden play. Anna Mae looked up to see 2 riders cresting the hill that led to their valley, Caleb returning from his weekly trip to town, and beside him, a figure that made Anna Mae's heart leap with nervous excitement. Her mother had come at last. Mae Robertson looked older than Anna Mae remembered, her once golden hair now silver, and her face lined with years of sorrow. But there was something different about her posture, something that spoke of a woman who had finally found the courage to stand straight after years of cowering. Anna Mae? Eleanor's voice was tentative as she dismounted, her eyes immediately finding her daughter across the garden. Hello, Mother. Anna Mae set Elena down, but kept one hand on her daughter's shoulder, drawing strength from the solid warmth of the little girl's presence. For a moment, neither woman moved. 2 years of letters had rebuilt some bridges between them, but seeing each other face to face brought all the old pain rushing back. Anna Mae saw her mother's eyes take in her twisted arm, her curved spine, and then move to Elena with something approaching wonder. This is your granddaughter, Anna Mae said quietly. Elena Rose Mitchell. Elena, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults, toddled forward with the fearless curiosity that defined her personality. Gamma? She asked, the word coming out as a delighted question. Eleanor's composure cracked completely. She knelt in the dirt without regard for her traveling dress and opened her arms. Yes, sweetheart, I'm your grandmother, and you are the most beautiful little girl I've ever seen. As Elena allowed herself to be swept into her grandmother's embrace, Anna Mae felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. This was what healing looked like. Not the erasure of old wounds, but the growth of new love around them. Caleb appeared at Anna Mae's side, his presence steady and reassuring. How are you holding up? He murmured. Better than I expected, Anna Mae replied honestly. She looks free, like she finally escaped whatever prison she was living in. Marcus? Caleb's voice held old anger, but also concern. Gone. She divorced him last year, after she found evidence of his business dealings with some unsavory characters in San Francisco. Turns out the law finally caught up with him. He's been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Anna Mae's voice held no satisfaction, only tired relief. She's been living with my aunt in Sacramento, learning to be her own person again. Over the following days, as Eleanor settled into the small guest room Caleb had built onto their cabin, Anna Mae watched her mother discover the woman she might have been if fear hadn't stolen so many years. Eleanor proved to be a natural with Elena, patient and playful in ways Anna Mae barely remembered from her own childhood. She's remarkable, Eleanor said one evening as they sat on the front porch watching Elena chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. So confident, so joyful. Nothing like I was at her age, Anna Mae finished gently. Eleanor's face crumpled with old guilt. I failed you so terribly, darling. I let him convince me that your injuries made you less than whole, that no one could ever truly love you. I was so afraid of his anger that I forgot to protect your heart. You were surviving the only way you knew how, Anna Mae said after a long moment. I understand that now, in ways I couldn't when I was young. But the cost was high for both of us. But look at us now. Anna Mae gestured toward Elena, who had collapsed in a giggling heap in the wildflowers, exhausted from her chase. We're here. We're together. And we have this beautiful little girl who proves every day that love really can conquer fear. As summer deepened into autumn, Eleanor proved herself invaluable around the homestead. Her years as Marcus's wife had taught her to manage a household efficiently, and she threw herself into helping with everything from preserving vegetables to mending clothes. More importantly, she became Elena's devoted companion, reading stories and teaching songs that Anna Mae dimly remembered from her own early childhood. I want to stay, Eleanor announced one evening as they prepared for winter. If you'll have me, I know I have no right to ask, after everything. You don't have to ask, Anna Mae interrupted. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. That winter, their first as an extended family, brought challenges none of them had anticipated. Elena's second birthday fell during a fierce blizzard that trapped them all inside the cabin for days. But instead of cabin fever, they discovered the joy of 3 generations learning to live together in harmony. Eleanor proved to be a gifted storyteller, weaving tales that made Elena's eyes shine with wonder. Anna Mae found herself remembering her own childhood differently, focusing not on the dark years with Marcus, but on the early memories of a mother who had loved her fiercely before fear taught her to hide that love. Do you ever regret it? Eleanor asked one snowy evening as they sat by the fire, Elena sleeping peacefully in her grandmother's lap. Marrying Caleb, I mean? Building this life so far from civilization? Anna Mae looked around their small cabin, at the quilts she'd sewn hanging on the walls, at Caleb's books lined up on shelves he'd built with his own hands, at the toys scattered across the floor that spoke of a childhood filled with laughter. How could I regret finding paradise? Even with all the hardships, the isolation, the hard work, the uncertainty? Especially because of those things. Anna Mae's voice was firm with conviction. Every challenge we've faced together has made us stronger. Every hardship we've overcome has proven that love really is enough to build a life on. As spring returned to the mountains, bringing with it the wildflowers that had given their valley its magic, Anna Mae stood once again in her garden with Elena playing at her feet. But now she wasn't alone. Eleanor worked beside her, teaching Elena the names of plants and flowers, while Caleb repaired fences in the distance. Mama, Elena said suddenly, tugging on Anna Mae's skirt. Why your arm different? It was the question Anna Mae had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She knelt down to Elena's level, choosing her words carefully. My arm got hurt when I was little, sweetheart. It made it work differently than other people's arms. Does it hurt? Sometimes. But you know what? What? It doesn't matter that it's different. What matters is that it can still hug you and help plant flowers and do all the things that matter most. Elena considered this with the seriousness that 2-year-olds brought to important subjects. Then she threw her small arms around Anna Mae's neck and declared, "I love your arm, Mama. I love all of you." In that moment, Anna Mae understood that her greatest victory wasn't overcoming the limitations others had placed on her body, but raising a daughter who saw differences as simply part of the beautiful variety of human existence. Elena would grow up knowing that worth came from character, not appearance, and that love multiplied rather than diminished when freely given. As the sun set over their mountain valley, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Anna Mae reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the frightened girl who had arrived in Silver Creek, believing herself damaged beyond repair, and marveled at the woman she had become, a wife, mother, and daughter who had learned that the most profound healing came not from fixing what was broken, but from discovering that broken things could be more beautiful than anything that had never known fracture. The last light faded from the mountains, and Anna Mae gathered her family close, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, whole, healed, and home.